Hi, it's Jacqueline or Galacticat, and welcome to episode 3 of Create This Book. I'm starting on this page, create a growth chart, figure out a way to show some kind of growing process. When I was editing the footage for drawing this page, I think I was sitting there for a good 5 minutes before I actually put a pencil to the paper and started drawing. Ultimately, I decided on showing a Pokemon evolution, and my favourite being Vulpix. I thought I would show the evolution from Vulpix to Ninetales as my growth. I know that technically it's labelled an evolution, not exactly a growth, but it does grow in size, I suppose, so it still works. I started by sketching out my little Vulpix in pencil and then continued on to do the Ninetales next to it as well. I pretty much used the typical poses that you would usually see Vulpix and Ninetales in. I just kind of put my own little flair on it and made them a little bit more chibi and a little bit more chubby. And can I just say that sketching out Ninetales' tails is actually so fun. Usually I'm used to drawing a Vulpix because if you know me, then you know that my alias on Instagram and everything else is actually Vulpix17, and I do have a Vulpix tattoo. I'm pretty obsessed with Vulpix, so I have drawn it a few times in the past, but never really drawn Ninetales that often. But I think I should start giving it a little bit more love and trying it out in different poses and seeing what I can do with those beautiful tails. So after I finish the sketches, I just go around it in a fine liner. I use my Sharpie pen for this, which is my favourite fine liner, and give them both a nice black outline. Once both of those are outlined, I go in with my Prismacolor pencils and put in those beautiful oranges and yellows. This just involves a whole lot of back and forth between a couple of colours, blending them out and making sure the colour is nice and smooth all throughout. If you've watched my videos before, then you know that I'm usually a watercolour artist and that I'm always shocked at how long it takes me to colour things in with Prismacolors. In the end though, I really do like how they look, and I think that the time that it takes to colour them in is totally worth it because it looks so smooth and so finished compared to something like Crayolas that always leave somewhat of a scratchy texture. I think these are really nice to work with and finish off a piece really well. If you've only ever used stuff like Crayolas, then I highly recommend you go out and spend the money on a even 12 pack of Prismacolors just to see how different it is working with them, because you will be surprised. And if you have any recommendations for art supplies that you want me to try out, then please let me know in the comments below, because I'd love to fill this book up with different art supplies that I'm not really used to. It's all about pushing myself outside of my comfort zone and thinking outside the square to fill up these pages. And also let me know which Pokemon evolution you would have chosen to draw. So for the background, I'm using a similar technique that I have done in a previous video, I think it might have been the last one, where I used pencil shavings to create a gradient texture. This time though, I'm using chalk pastels, which I stole from my brother. Thank you, Nathan, if you're watching. Who am I kidding? He never watches my YouTube videos. Anyway, so I smudged that out with a tissue to create this really soft gradient look. I went back and forth a few times with the light and the dark pastels to create a little bit more depth, and then at the end I added some stars. Because you'll know by now that I love my galaxies, so of course I was going to add stars. I didn't have too many colours to choose from, so I chose these two blues to contrast the yellows and the oranges of the Vulpix and Ninetales. Once I've finished with this background, I go around the Vulpix and Ninetales with a thicker black marker just to make them stand out and pop a little bit more off the page. I also use a Posca marker to add the highlights of their eyes and make them look a little less demonic. The next page I decided to do was create nostalgia, make this page sentimental. I thought I would approach this one slightly differently and flip the page sideways. I don't know how I feel about this. I do kind of like looking through the book and seeing everything the right way, but for what I wanted to add, this was the most logical way of doing it. Basically, I wanted to draw a girl in the middle who looked like she was from the 2000s. I wanted to draw her in 2000s clothing with nostalgic things all around her, things that I grew up with. So I dressed her in a layered top because everyone in the 2000s wore layered tops. We thought it was the coolest thing ever. I gave her some slightly flared jeans and I added a choker, some butterfly clips and some jelly bangles as well. I remember they were the coolest thing and everyone had jelly bangles all the way up to their elbows if they could. I surrounded her with things like a Tamagotchi, a Furby, an iPod mini, a Game Boy Advance SP with a little Pokeball popping out of it, an MSN logo and a Nokia 3310. I will admit I actually had most of these things except for the Nokia. I didn't have the famous Nokia 3310, I had a different model, but I still had fair few Nokias. I remember upgrading from a Nokia phone to like an LG flip phone and I thought it was the coolest thing. And then the Motorola Razrs came out and they were so pretty and so skinny and so tiny, and my LG flip phone just didn't look as cool anymore because it was bulky and brick-like and old, I guess. Everyone who didn't have a Motorola Razr wanted one, but everyone that had one probably ended up breaking it within a couple of weeks of having it. I can't believe I grew up through such a vast evolution of phones. Like, teenagers today are probably growing up with iPhones, but I grew up with a phone where I could only send a certain amount of letters in one message and everything else had to be sent in a second message or third message even. We were sharing polyphonic ringtones through infrared. It's that crazy. Anyway, I could go on and on about phones that I've had in the past. So moving on. I did have a few Tamagotchis. I actually do still have both of them and they both still work. I did prefer the one that I was able to pause because mum didn't have to look after it when I went to school and I didn't have the fear of it being dead when I got home. But props to my mum because she had to look after not just mine but my brother's Tamagotchis as well, so she did a good job. Thanks, mum. Okay, next topic, Furbies. I know they're technically a 90s thing, I had mine during the 90s, but I know they made a comeback in the 2000s as well. The one I depicted in this drawing was my original one from the 90s, but I did have one of the newer ones from the 2000s as well. The problem with the later one is that I was getting a little bit older, and at the time I had a retainer. So I couldn't say the word Furby very well because it gave me a slight lisp whenever I wore the retainer. So yeah, it wasn't as fun for me as it was when I was a child. Okay, iPods. I remember when my friend got an iPod mini and I listened to it and I thought, oh my god, this is the coolest thing, and I immediately wanted one after that. I didn't end up getting an iPod mini, but I did get an iPod Nano, so that was cooler anyway. I remember one of my friends even had an iPod Shuffle, and we used to sit in science class with one earphone in my ear and one in her ear, and because it didn't have a screen, we had to sit there skipping through all the songs to try and find the ones that we liked. Okay, on to the Game Boy. So I had a blue Game Boy SP, just like the one I've drawn in this picture, and my first game was Pokemon Leaf Green. I remember my brother sitting next to me all the time watching me play this Pokemon game, and eventually Mum had to buy him his own Game Boy and his own Pokemon game just so he could play it as well. I also remember when Nintendo brought out their DS's and literally everyone had a DS with specifically Nintendogs. So every party and every sleepover, we would all have our DS's out, screaming at our damn dogs to make them do tricks or to make them learn their name, and I will never forget that memory. Also PictoChat. I remember taking my DS to camp once and we were all talking through different dorms through PictoChat. Oh, days were so different back then. Right, on to the last one, MSN. Oh boy, do I have memories about MSN. I remember my brother used to send me those little GIF animation things, and he always used to send me the knocking one and the woman laughing one. I don't know if anyone remembers these, but my brother used to send me them all the time. I remember that emojis used to be called emoticons, and you used to be able to customize it depending on which word you wanted to add it to. And I remember if you added an emoticon to the word hi and you wanted to write the word this, you had to write th.is just so the emoticon wouldn't pop up in the middle of your word. I remember waiting for your crush to sign in and then signing out and signing back in just so they would notice that you were online and hopefully start talking to you. MSN was a whole other world, guys. Like, we have Facebook and we have Messenger and we have Discord and we have whatever other chatting things that we have these days, but we're also somewhat disconnected. So we've always got our phones in our hands and we can reply whenever we want at any time. But back then we were on the computer and we were only replying when we were on the computer. So we'd dedicate that part of our day to talk to our friends, to be there and be present all the time, rather than having that disconnect of getting a message and I'll reply to it later. So we were spending hours and hours and hours having these endless conversations with people, and I feel like we don't have anything like that these days. Anyway, that's my deep and meaningful for the day. I think that's probably about the most voiceover I've ever done in one whole segment. So we will move on. Down the bottom, I thought it needed a little bit of something there, so I added a 2000s kind of title in the traditional bubble writing that I used to do when I was in year 6. Then of course I finish off the page with some stars in the background and a black outline to make everything else pop. And of course, I haven't been forgetting my little rule I created at the start of the book, which was to put a little cat face on every page, so I put it on the little Tamagotchi in this one. For the last page of this episode, I decided to create a page of notes. Take notes on something mundane, people around you, the weather, what the room looks like, etc. And then I thought it was the perfect time for a cup of tea. But not really, because I used the tea bags to stain the pages to look old. I definitely had a recurring theme of nostalgia for this episode because I used to use this technique a lot when I was younger if I ever wanted to make something look old. For example, if we were doing a study about World War One and we had to pretend to write a letter home as if we were in the war, or if we were studying a historical figure and we had to write information about them, I would always use this technique to make my work look a little bit more authentic. Basically, what you do is you steep a few tea bags in hot water, make sure not to burn yourself, and then rub that tea bag on whatever piece of paper you're planning on using. Once that's dry, you can finish off the look by either ripping the edges like you see me doing here, or you can give it a little bit more colour and a little bit more of a worn look by burning the edges very carefully with a lighter. Then I got one of my brush pens. I think I'm using a Pentel I'm using a Tombow here. Sorry, I filmed this back in January, so yeah, it was a while ago. Then I wrote my mundane notes in a kind of quick, messy cursive. I didn't want it to seem too neat and too polished. I wanted to give a rustic, authentic look to it, so that's why I used this kind of script. Although I did want the passage itself to sound a little bit eloquent and old-timey, so I'll read to you how I wrote it. The room is white. The windowsill is full of objects like gum leaves, gemstones, fossils, wine bottles long emptied, a goblet with a dragon seal containing supplies such as paintbrushes and pens for the artist who resides in this space. When gazing out of the window, a yard with green grass, small bushes, and a line to dry freshly washed clothes on is enclosed by a solid cream-coloured fence. Beyond the fence, one might see birds along the electricity wires that tower above the fence. Long posts emit artificial light at night, but stand tall and dormant during the hours when the sun lights the land. Inside, below the windowsill, there is a desk. The desk is often covered in pencils or paint, and occasionally a cat, with fur like snow, and patches of ginger and brown. Her legs tuck under her as she settles herself on the clear space the artist has left for her, and gazes out the window at the birds from before, who are still sitting on the electricity wire. So I'd obviously written this about my little studio and my little art space that I work in. So that brings us to the end of this episode. Let me know what you thought and which page was your favourite. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a thumbs up and subscribe if you want to see me finish the rest of this book.